and today we're going to look at a number of suggestions on how to bridge the gap between Europe and Japan. To do that, we looked at history, philosophy, the differences between Japan and Europe, and also the things that they have in common. And I identified a number of gaps that exist between Japan and Europe, from different, looking at different angles. So there are some obvious differences, like, for example, Europe is obviously a continent, which means that there are people with different ethnical backgrounds living together. Many different peoples on the same continent that are constantly in contact with each other, sometimes in conflict. They need to negotiate, they need to engage, they need to make deals in order to coexist, and they're also constantly on the move. This is in stark contrast.
I'm afraid she lost connection.
Okay. I will get her.
What? What do you say?
Yuva seems to have lost connection. Yeah.
Oh,
let me try to re-establish. It's okay. All right. So, so looking at the differences between Europe and Japan, I don't know exactly where we lost you, so I'm going to start from the beginning. Anyway, obvious difference between Japan and Europe is that Japan is an island, and an island with people with the same ethnical background, with the same religious background. There are no religious differences, and very, very stable. There's an emperor that has a longest, extremely long history. It's a very long reigning history. So this is an island of stability, of people that have been living together for a very long time, with very little conflict and relatively few wars. If you compare it with Europe, where different people are living together, they have different ethnical backgrounds, tribal backgrounds, different culture, different languages. They are very often moving and very often have conflict with each other. So this is a continent with of conflict, negotiation, of trying to build bridges and war. So there is it's very unstable continent. But that constant source of war and negotiation shaped the people, because they developed warfaring skills and negotiation skills, and are very accustomed to dealing with strangers. Another gap that exists between, or actually something that they have in common, is that they both have a very strong spiritual thing in common, and that is, on the one hand, in Europe, religion, Christianity, and on the other hand, Confucianism in Japan. This is actually something they have in common, in the way that they are both basically a guideline for people on how they should live their lives. The Bible describes what people should do in order to go to heaven. There are certain rules. There are certain things that you should do. So like you should pray. You should be a good person, and if you do that, then you can go to heaven. Confucianism is similar in that respect, that it tells people to be patient and to first make sure that your household is in harmony before you can become a gentleman. So those are fundamentally maybe the same guidelines that guide a society, but the content, of course, is a little bit different. But they're both guidelines. A A difference, however, is the strong role that the philosophy plays in European society, where their European philosophy is based on critical thinking, on model thinking, and logical reasoning. This tradition was founded with the Greeks, and basically the way that we think in Europe is in models. So we're trying to take something that is very complex and difficult to understand, and we make it simple in a model. So something very complex. For example, like how does a company work? If you ask that to a European, then very quickly he will draw a number of squares and a number of circles and some lines in between, and that is a model of how a company works. That model becomes the topic of discussion, and basically we will, if we discuss the company and we agree on the model, we will try to create relationships between cause and effect. Then on the other hand, we have the Japanese way of thinking, which is was more focused on, or basically not so much focused on making it simpler, but just trying to understand it in its entire complexity, which means that basically they are not really trying to simplify the reality. They're not really try to create something very complex into something very simple, into a model, but more looking at all the complexity from different angles, looking at a company on, okay, so how does the company operate in terms of purchasing, and then in production, and how do these things relate, and then again from purchasing to sales, and then from purchasing to HR, and then going back from HR to sales. Not trying to necessarily simplify, but just looking at a very complex thing from different angles to get a better understanding. So that is a process of iteration. So we're just going around and around and around and looking at an entity from different angles, whereas in Western philosophy, Western way of thinking, it's very much a linear process of going from A to B to C to D,